Well, if you didn't already know by the turnout, I'm not preaching today. Again, I'm trying not to take it personal. But no, today is a special day. It was about a year and a half ago that we started looking to fill our administrative assistant role. And I wasn't a part of that initial meeting. As the senior pastor, we formed a committee. I said, go through the application, see who you like, interview a few, pray about it, and then when you narrow it down, then please include me. I'll go out to lunch, make sure that we can get along and all of those things. And so we interviewed, I think, a couple, maybe two. And after the interview with Brittany, from what I hear, everybody's, before she left the parking lot, like, that's it. That's her. That's who we're supposed to have here as our administrative assistant. And then we met, and we walked into Don Chavez for lunch, and I'm pretty sure Brittany did not think I was the senior pastor. At the time, I had my nose ring in, my gauges. I've already colored a lot of myself, and I'm pretty sure she didn't think I was a pastor. Then I introduced myself, and we had a wonderful lunch, and she was tired. And I'm not going to give away her secret. She's got her story to tell. But a year and a half later, we've been with the Farkas family, and they've been with us, and it's an incredible, incredible journey. Not only is Brittany now our administrative assistant, but she's also taken the role of doing a lot more of our outreach. She has a heart for that, and we as a church have a heart for that. If you remember, that's where I was hired before I became senior pastor, was director of outreach. So Brittany's taken a lot of that as well. And so she has an incredible story, and I have to be honest, I'm really proud that we're part of it. Because as you hear this story, there's a part that we play at Trinity of showing grace, the same grace that God has given to us again and again and again and again. And Brittany's experienced that in her own life. And so Brittany and Ryan and Logan and Alex are already deeply ingrained into our Trinity family. We love them so much. Ryan does incredible things for this church. He's stepped in to more of a head trustee role, helps with a lot of our technology. He's a lunch buddy of mine, probably weekly. That's kind of nice. And then what Brittany's doing has been incredible as well. And so she came and we talked, and I said, Brittany, when you're ready to share your story, and this was months ago, maybe even a year and a half ago when I first met her, knew a little bit about her story. I said, when you're ready, your story is going to make an impact for the kingdom. And there's no doubt. And you're going to hear it today. And so I'm excited when she said she felt like it was time. She was nervous before. She understands that. She's not the public speaker always, but she's very, very, she's ready. She's good at it. And I think today you're going to hear an incredible story. And again, for us who call Trinity home, I just want to say thank you. And I'm sure she'll say it as well. But it's cool when a church shows grace, what God does. And as you look around this room today, there's many faces here because we showed grace to one person. And that's God's economy. He doesn't add things, He multiplies them. We show grace to one, and now we're showing grace to 50. And God's growing it continually. So we're really excited. I'm not preaching. I'm sorry. Without further ado, Brittany Farkas.
All right, good morning. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here. It's so important to me that people that I work with and the people that I go to church with know a lot about me, and some of you do, some of you don't. So I believe in transparency, and so that's why I wanted to share my story with you today. So if you could bring up the first slide, I titled my message, Radical Redemption. And the reason I did that is because when God does things, He doesn't just like, oh, this is what happened. No, God's big. Like, He's doing something huge. So radical is just big, out there, in your face, and that's how God works. Sometimes He works, with a small, still, quiet voice, but most of the time it's a huge thing. And so with me, it took a lot for Him to do that, and so I really thought that was a good title. So if you'll pull up the second slide, the word radical means relating to or affecting the fundamental nature of something, far-reaching or thorough. How many of you know that's how God works? Sometimes he's far-reaching, but he's very thorough. If you trust in him, he is thorough. The word redemption means the act of saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil. And so throughout my life, I've heard many stories of men and women who've lived in sin, and they were just radically changed by either one event, one circumstance, one instant that just, bam, there it was. God was ready for them, and they were ready now. I never thought that I would have that story. I never thought that I would be one of those people. I went from being abandoned, abused, religiously scorned, chewed up and spit out by the world, to being radically redeemed. So if you'll bring up the next slide. There are 3 biblical examples I wanted to share with you today before I get into my story too much. One being the prodigal son. I think we've all heard it. We all know the gist of what it is, but it was the younger son of a wealthy man whose father, or he asked his father for an inheritance. He thought he'd be better off without his family constraints, and so he went and did whatever he wanted to do. He squandered that inheritance frivolously, and so he didn't want to go back to his dad. He went, and he was so desperate that he was working for a farmer, and he ended up eating with the pigs. He then decided it was time to return to his father, but instead of going and thinking that his father was going to scorn him or scold him, his father welcomed him with open arms, just like our Father does us. No matter what we do, like he said, again and again and again and again, he's always there with open arms. The second is Ruth. And I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and so I didn't know there were any other books besides Revelation, because that's all I heard. So I found, this book in the Old Testament, Ruth. And Ruth is one of the greatest love stories in the Bible. There are many, but it's one of my favorite. And Ruth married into a Hebrew family soon after all the men passed away, and she was left caring for her mother-in-law. Some of you, that might be a task. My mother-in-law's watching, so I can't say, but no, I'm just kidding. I love you, Joyce. She went and she was working in the grain fields of a wealthy man named Boaz. Boaz was a near kinsman of Naomi, and back then, if your husband dies, then if the next relative is available, you marry them. That's just how it went. She did not expect, if you read the story, for this to happen. She was very humble. Even though there was another man who possessed the right to marry Ruth, Boaz, who is referred to as a kinsman redeemer in the Bible, took Ruth with all her baggage. She had, we all have baggage, but he took Ruth with all her baggage. Not only did he just take her, he actually paid for her, paid for the right to marry her. And so I always say that that's just one of my favorite stories. Ruth and Boaz are the great-grandparents of King David, who was a man after God's own heart. So just the lineage there was very, very, very wonderful. And I always refer to Brian as my Boaz. He took me with all the baggage that came along with me. He didn't care, and he loved me. And then we went on, we built a beautiful family together. The third is Saul of Tarsus, and all of these the scriptures are up here if you would like to go back and read them. Saul was not a good person. He persecuted Jews. He was a murderer, but on the road to Damascus, he encountered our God. And when that happened, Saul was then turned into the Apostle Paul, who is one of the most prolific people in the Bible. You say Paul, everybody knows who you're talking about. You say Hagar, some people are like, what? Who's that? I don't know who that is. But he is a martyr for Christ. And so I want to share with you how I got here today. My childhood was not great. I was born into a military family. My entire family's military. And then I married my husband, who was also in the military. So we just kind of kept that going. That was a trend. My mother abandoned me. when I was, I want to say I was in the 3rd grade. She left me with my grandparents. My father was an alcoholic. He was very abusive, and so that is why my family separated. My mother married my stepfather, and for her, it was a priority to be with him and not with her own children. So we went to my grandparents, and that is where my relationship with Christ began, because my family is Pentecostal. And when I say Pentecostal, I'm talking long dresses, hair, screaming, yelling. There were no snakes. I don't know if they're doing that now. I can't make any guarantees, but they were very, very much, we were always at church, always at the church. We did even, I remember waking up I think it was a Saturday, and my grandma was like, we're going to church. I'm like, it's not Sunday, why are we going to church? But we were there every time the doors were open. I had a younger brother. His name was Jared, and he was everything to me. We've been through everything together. He was one of the closest people to me. And he never understood why our parents did what they did. He never understood that. But we clung to our grandparents because they were the only thing we ever knew. In math, they have a thing called a constant, which is something that's always there. And they were always my constant. So after my parents divorced, my mother remarried 1 year later to my stepfather, who chose to live a criminal life. So he was in and out of prison and jail for various things. We were probably, I want to say, my brother and I were I was probably 10 and he was 8. My mother would come in and out. My grandparents were her parents, and my mother was always in and out. They never wanted to push away their own daughter because they very much like the prodigal son. That is always how they did her. I remember being left in a car in a ditch with my younger brother. It was extremely, extremely traumatizing. And when you don't deal with that trauma, eventually someday it catches up with you, like it did to me. So I was probably about, I want to say 16. My brother was diagnosed with cancer. And for us, it was heartbreaking. My brother was everything to me. We did everything together. We fought, we played, we did everything. But then I saw him slowly dwindle away, and God called him home when he was 18. Prior to that, about 4 months prior to that, while my brother was still alive, I was the victim of a sexual assault. It was very traumatizing. But because I was raised the way that I was in a Pentecostal home, and I'm not saying anything bad about Pentecostal people, so don't take that, but you're taught that if something bad happens to you, you must have done something. You must have done something to bring it. What did you do? Because God doesn't just do that stuff to you. What did you do? You didn't pray hard enough. You didn't seek God. You weren't living right. It was always, something like that. My brother passed away, and I was broken. Very, very, very broken. I missed him so much. I still do. To this day, I still miss him. Ryan can tell you there are times around his birthday in January and his death in August that are very hard for me because I still catch myself wanting to call him. 3 weeks after my brother passed away, I met Ryan, and I met my Boaz, and he was so kind and so loving. My family's big and loud, and so when they met Ryan, they were like, where did you find him? Because he's not like us. He is not like us at all, at all. But he slowly, they got him to talk, and every now and then I'll still catch him like, okay, you got to talk. People think you're weird if you don't. Ryan was in the military. We spent a lot of good nights just talking on the phone. We actually married 4 months after we met. But when God's in something, why wait? If God's in it, why wait? And I remember in middle school, we took a class in church, and it was you prayed for your husbands. And they said, make a list of everything you want in a husband and pray over that, and that's what God's going to send you. Were they wrong? Because Brian met a lot of things on that list, but some of them Not so much. Ryan's not a singer. You're not going to catch him up here leading worship at all. But that was one of the things I loved. And I thought that I wanted. But God doesn't send you what you want. He sends you what you need. Sometimes he puts them in weird packages, and we don't know why this person or that person is in our life. But he knows what he's doing, so we just have to trust him. We then had our oldest son, Alex. And Alex is... He says he's an introvert, but I think he's lying because he's really not. He'll talk to you. Few years later, we were blessed with Logan. Ryan and I struggled financially. He had gotten out of the Army. He hadn't finished college yet, so he was working through that. I was working. I worked at the DMV for a number of years. We struggled so much. Finally, we moved around a lot too. That was a part of the struggle. We probably shouldn't have done that, but we didn't ask God. If we'd have asked, he probably would have said, don't do that. We finally thought that Ryan had got this job in Chicago. He was building computer software for Northwestern. We were like, this is the answer to our financial prayers. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be wonderful. We're going to get to do all this exciting stuff. And that was not what happened. Chicago ended up being probably the worst year of our marriage. We had been married 9 years at that time, and it was, 8 years at that time, and it was very, very difficult. We found out that our youngest son, Logan, had autism. We always wondered, why he was a little different, but we just loved him and went on with it. For a long time, we just thought he was bad. We didn't know there was anything wrong with him. Logan was diagnosed with autism, and Ryan was working so much that he wasn't home like he normally was. We always raised our children together. We always did everything as a team. And for one day, it just clicked. You know what? I can't handle any more of this. I can't do any more. As soon as these kids are in bed, I'm going to go drink. I'm going to get a glass of wine. Glass of wine turned into 2. 2 turned into 3. Then it was bottles. Then it was hard liquor. We went through, it was the worst year that year that we were there. I ended up in rehab for the very first time. Notice I said first, because we have to learn again and again and again. It took me a couple times. I ended up in rehab that summer. And I thought, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to get through it. It's going to be fine. Ryan was always there, like, hey, we can do it. Everything will be good. We'll just keep going. But not one time did I think to pray. Not one time did I think to pray. By that time, even though I had grown up in the church, I was also hurt by the church a lot. And that happens to a lot of people. I always talk to people, some of the ladies that we work with that are incarcerated, and they'll say, I don't want to go to church, or I don't want to know anything about God, because they have been hurt over and over and over again by church people. That summer, Northwestern finished their software package, and they laid Ryan off. And most people would be sad about that, but we really weren't. It was really a bad year. So we moved. We were getting ready to think about what we were going to do. My grandfather died. My grandfather was the strongest, most loving, caring, accepting person I'd ever met. And he raised me just like I was his own daughter. Never treated me any differently than anyone else. Not anyone else, than his own kids. I remember growing up, my grandfather never spanked me. My grandma did, but my grandpa didn't. He never did. He always showed love and acceptance and care. After that happened, we were getting ready to have the funeral for my grandpa, and Ryan got an email. That was when he got his email from Chicago saying that they didn't need him. At that time, we were like, well, we'll go back to Oklahoma. Man, it continued a really bad time. I started drinking even more and more, to the point where I would black out and become irrational. I would lash out. I would throw things completely against my nature, because I'm not a violent person whatsoever. As much as I thought I could handle it, I knew I couldn't. So I went to rehab again, this time with a psychiatric part of it, because I was acting like a crazy person. I definitely should have been in there. Brian and I were talking, and he said, you know what, I think it's time that we move. I think we need a fresh start. So he started, he actually was offered a job here at Parkview over the phone doing IT. We thought it'll be a fresh start, and it wasn't. All those old demons were coming back to me. I was really struggling with everything at that time. Just when you think things can't get worse, they can get worse. I was drinking. I was passing out in the backyard. I was passing out in my car, driving. God had his hand on me because I should have had a wreck. Thank God I didn't kill anybody, let alone I would drink drunk with my own, or drive drunk even with my own children. One night it got so bad, and I can't even remember anything that happened, but I had lashed out at Ryan, and I was just being very physically abusive and aggressive towards him, and he didn't know what else to do, so he called the cops. I went to jail. I spent the weekend in jail. It was bad, but it really wasn't the worst part of my story. I spent the weekend in jail. I got an attorney. I had a no contact order. I couldn't even talk to Ryan. And when you're married to somebody, especially as long as we had been married and have families, it's really hard to not talk to that person. About a month after my first arrest, I had gotten so bad. I had drank so much. I was drinking probably a gallon of vodka a week. Never daily, but I would go on binges for a week, and then it would take me 3 or 4 days to recover from that. I spent 3 days in the hospital because I was so weak and I couldn't even walk. My blood work was off, my enzymes were off. I just sat in the hospital, and I sat there for 3 days, and of everything that happened, those 3 days were really that was my bottom. I didn't know how to get up from that. I hadn't, but never once did I think, it's time to get God involved in this. I thought I could handle it on my own. So after 3 days in the hospital, I got out, I went home, and I was sitting there thinking, is this it for me, God? Is this it? Is this how my life is going to end? Am I just going to be a hopeless alcoholic that drinks herself to death? I really thought that. I then started drinking even more, because when you're hurting, you want to cover that hurt up. And it's really hard to handle things if you don't know how, if you've never been taught a healthy way to handle things. I got a DUI. I didn't even remember it. I woke up in jail and had no idea why I was there. No clue. I had to ask. I went to court the next morning. The judge let me go home. You'd think that would be the end, but it wasn't. I went home angry, hurt, not knowing what to do, not looking for guidance, just thinking that I could handle something on my own. One night we had a huge blowout, the biggest argument that Ryan and I ever had, and I don't even remember it, but he does. I then went to jail for 96 days. And I had never been in trouble before. I was a good church girl. You don't do stuff like that. But January, March, and April of 2020, I did. I spent 96 days in jail. I was then court ordered to rehab, again, for the third time. I spent 30 days in Park Center, alone, by myself. That was where God really got a hold of me. Recovery is a process, and it takes a little while. So I spent those 30 days there. I then spent 6 months in a halfway house. It was horrible for me because I was torn apart from my kids. I was always a stay-at-home mom for the most part, except for a few years that I would work. I didn't have my family. I was by myself. I didn't know what to do. And I remember sitting in the living room, and it was, I don't know where she's at, Vicki. She's here somewhere. Vicki came, and she prayed with me. And I knew I had to let go, and I knew it was time to let God, but I just couldn't do it. Oh. We good? Okay. I just couldn't do it. I thought that there was still something that I could fix, that I could do. I didn't need any help. I can handle this. 6 months in the halfway house, I met some wonderful ladies there. I met Deb. She led Bible study. And Bible study ended up, at first I didn't want to have anything to do with it because I was mad at God. He did this to me. Even though I knew better, because I knew God doesn't punish you. God doesn't do that. We do that to ourselves. He will allow you to go through things, but he's never going to do it to you. Debbie would do Bible study, and her and I would talk, and we had a really great relationship, and those were the high points of my time. But I never dealt with the mental health part of it, and I never dealt with my why. Why did I start doing this to begin with? I thought, I don't know, I'll be fine. It'll be okay. 3 weeks after I left the halfway house, I was drinking. I had asked a lady who was one of the staff members there to be my sponsor. I didn't really think that through. I thought that it would be okay. I called her, I was drinking, I was really struggling, and Ryan called and asked her if she would come over, and she did. I didn't know she had called house arrest. I was on a house arrest ankle monitor. About an hour later, community corrections came in and they breathalyzed me, and I went back to jail. I sat there with a lot of ladies who I knew, because by this time I had been to jail a couple of times. And I was thinking in my head, you know what, I'm not violated anything, I'm gonna be okay. They're gonna let me go. They're gonna put me back on my ankle monitor. They may make me do another program, but they're gonna let me go. They didn't. During this time that I was drinking, we had to find jobs. I didn't want to have anything to do with the job at that time. Not one thing to do with the job. I didn't need the money. I didn't care. I didn't want to put any effort into it. I just wanted to go home and hide in my room. I didn't want to be seen. There was an ad that popped up, and there was one for a Methodist church looking for an administrative assistant. And I thought, okay, it's part-time. I'll try it. So I got a phone call from Pastor Susan, who wanted to interview me. And I was like, okay. So I walk into my interview here, and I saw Mary and Joe and Nancy and Pat, and I can't remember who else was in on that meeting, but they were very gracious. They were very caring. They knew I had an ankle monitor on for house arrest. They knew that I was in trouble. And then they hired me. And that kind of threw me off a little bit. I'm like, okay, is there something wrong with them or me? Because I don't know why they would want somebody who had, by this time, 2 felonies to work at their church. Then I met Pastor David, which, as he told you, I'm going to tell you, it really threw me off. It really threw me off. I remember sitting there when he walked in, and I was expecting, an older man in a 3-piece suit to come in and talk, and then he walked in, and I'm like, okay. So let's go with this. So I went with it because that's where I went. That's where I was doing. I'm just going to go with it. I don't know better than God. So he obviously sent them in my path for a reason. I worked here for 3 months. Remember I said they didn't let me go? They sent me to prison. I went to prison for 6 months for a drinking violation. I was sitting in jail, and I didn't think anything really other than, why am I here? I can't believe this. It's happening again. Is this going to be over and over until I die? I wasn't really thinking about my job at that time. Pastor Susan called. We had a video visit, and she told me, she said, I just want you to know that we had an ad council meeting, and we talked about you, and we talked about your position here. We know you're going to be going away for 6 months, but we're going to hold your job for you. That's grace. Grace that I didn't deserve. I was very undeserving of that. So I went to prison, and by this time, I had been praying a lot, but still praying angry. Why did you do this to me, God? Why did you let me go through this? Why did you give me this affliction? Why did this happen to me? When you quit asking God why, and you start asking, God, what can I do with this? You will be amazed at what will happen. So I was sitting in Indiana Women's Prison two or 3 weeks from getting to come home. The whole time that I was there, I talked to Pastor Susan every week. I talked to Laura, who is my mentor. She's back there. I talked to her every week. They didn't always tell me what I wanted to hear, but I talked to them. I talked to Debbie every week. She taught me that it was okay to be upset, but only for a little while. Then we got to figure out why we're upset, how to fix it, and turn it into our what. So 2 weeks from getting out, I was in quarantine, and I was sitting with a lady who was sitting on the ground crying, and I didn't understand why she was crying. I didn't have the same issues as some of these ladies face. I had resources. I had a home to go home to. I had a support system. She sat on the floor crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, I go home in 2 days, and I don't know where I'm going to go. I have no idea where I'm going to go. I read a book called Being Mrs. Burton by Susan Burton, and it's a lady who had started a transitional home for women after she had spent decades in and out of prison. She did it with her children, or she did it by herself. Her children and family had left her, but she cared enough to bring kids into her own home, so she started that, and I started thinking, I'm like, okay, God, what is it that you want me to learn from this whole experience, and what is it that you want me to do with that experience? So I got home. I was so glad to be home, but I was also nervous because I didn't really know what I was going to do. During the process of me being in prison, I had kind of matched some ladies up with some pen pals from ladies on the outside because they didn't have anybody. I met some great women. I always thought, because of my own experience with people who are incarcerated, that there was something wrong with them and they were bad. There is a lot of really good people in jails and prisons that are just hurting, afflicted, broken, and have no direction and don't know Jesus. The second they find all that, their lives turn around. It takes them, they stumble, they fall a little bit, but they always come back. I came home, Jess and I started Break Free Ministries. That's when that started. We didn't really know what we were going to do. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know how this was going to work, but we started it. We started hearing from these ladies that they needed places to go. So we sat down, we started thinking, we're like, we can do that, but we want to make sure we're sending them to good places. That's how we started the transition program. The past year of my life has been a turning point, not only for me, but for my family. Not only did this church love me and give me grace, they wrapped their arms around my family and they did the same thing. If you take nothing from today other than there are people out there who really will give you grace and who will love you, and they love you without conditions. There's no conditions on it. I don't always do the right thing. I don't always say the right thing. I don't always do what I should do. I still work on that. I think we all still do every day. I turned my why into a what. When I did that, God opened a door and he showed me, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know when it would explode, and it did. Boy, did it ever explode. There's a lot of my story I did leave out, but I felt like I picked the pieces out that I wanted everyone to hear today. That no matter what you do, no matter how broken you are, no matter how afflicted or defeated you are, there's always chance. As long as you are breathing, there's always hope. You can turn your story into a story of radical redemption. And I want you to bring up the last slide. This person right here was broken, abused, hurt, lost. God took that person and gave me this. And he can do that for each person here. No matter how old you are, that doesn't matter. God doesn't care. One of my favorite quotes is by a pastor named Stephen Furtick, and it's, there's no one better than you to do what God intended you to do. No one better. So as I close today, I want to thank this church for the grace and mercy that you showed me and my family. I want to thank each woman who has volunteered to mentor a lady who's incarcerated, because those letters, messages, they make a profound impact on their lives, and that may be the seed that they need to start growing. So I want to ask Christy and Becky and Jess, if you'll join me up here. These ladies, this is what God, when he took that picture that you saw, when he changed it, he gave me these ladies here. They do break free with me, and they're my favorite ladies. David always teases us, they're my first, second, and third BFFs. Debbie, Laura, Vicki, if you don't mind standing. Surround yourself with people like this. People who care, who aren't afraid to tell you what you need to hear, even if you don't want to hear it, and that will love you unconditionally like Christ loves us. Brian, if you'll come here for a second. I don't mean to put you on the spot. If you haven't already, find your Boaz. This right here, this is family. This is what God created. This is community. This is what God intended life to be like. He didn't intend for us to suffer. So I want to thank you all. Thank you, sweetheart, for loving me.
Yes, so obviously want to thank Brittany for sharing her story. It was funny, like, we started the service with the Be the Church time, but I kind of feel like the last half hour was Be the Church time. Because when you see grace and you're able to give it, but sometimes it's even hard to receive it, but when you're able to receive it, that's being the church. That's being the church better than anything we could do on a Sunday morning. And nothing wrong with Sunday morning. It's beautiful to worship together because that's what family does. But I think we just heard about a half hour Be the Church time. And I think it's something to celebrate. So I'm going to ask, if you were, or during that time, if you were a member of our ad council in any form or fashion, would you please stand up? Please stand up. If you look around, there's 4 today. There's a lot that aren't with us. These are people who unanimously said, we've known her for 3 months. Let's let her take a 6-month vacation and come back. And they did it. And when we went to ad council, thank you very much. When we went to ad council that first Tuesday that she was gone. It was an idea that I had been praying about, and I felt like God says, if you share grace, this will be a story that explodes. It is not an audible thing. I'm Pentecostal too, but I'm not hearing him. It's just that gut sensation. That God said, if you show grace, be the church, it's going to impact your community. And when I went to ad council, it was a thought we had, but I did not share it with anybody. But other people in ad council, which is the governing board of this church, the leaders of this church, we're all leaders, but they step up to lead in different areas unanimously. There was, I think, I'm going to guess somewhere between 11 and 15 members of our ad council at that meeting, and 100% of them said, we will keep this position for her because she's part of our family, and this is what grace does. That's awesome. You can clap for that. And I feel like God's already answering those prayers. Almost 60 women who are hearing from someone that is not incarcerated, on the outside, if you will, who's just trying to breathe life into them in different forms or fashion. Placing countless women. A month ago, we had Redemption House here who asked to come. We've worked and we've had Genesis House here. Today we have the lovely ladies from Heart and House with us today. And right there alone is close to 50 women because of one. Which is God's economy so cool. Where he takes one, it turns it into 50. And so I think so many times we don't celebrate what we do, and the world celebrates better than the church does. But I just want to say, as the senior pastor here, how honored I am to work at a church whose administrative assistant is a 2-time felon. I'm so excited because it's not the end of the story. And we talked about this before we got together, and we're going to close. We're not going to even have a time of prayer, though the altars will be open. I want Brittany to go out in a minute to shake hands like I like to do. But I talked with Brittany, and I said the one thing I would ask, and I don't usually tell people how to preach when it's their turn, but I said, please do this. Do not end your story with where you were at. Because that's not the story any of us are ending at. The end of every one of our stories, if we're willing, is redemption. Radical redemption from a loving, gracious God. And that's where I said, that was my only caveat. And so she's been with us now almost a year and a half total. Again, what her family's doing, the ministry she has to women. And I think it's a pretty cool story. And I thank you all so very much for being a part of it and being a part of a church. We've asked a few of the women over the times they've been here, and you've met many of them. We were in a meeting about a month ago, and this is where I close. We were at a meeting about a month ago. We're doing some vision casting for the church. And I asked 2 special ladies, Doreen and Sharon, I asked them, I said, can you just kind of explain to us why Trinity? What is it that we can do to continue to minister to people who need ministering to? And they said the one caveat, the one thing that they felt, not a caveat, that's not the right word, the one thing that they sensed every time they walked through the door is gracious acceptance. And one of them used that term, gracious acceptance. And I got to be honest, if in this community and in this city and in our world, if Trinity is known as a church of gracious acceptance, I could not be more proud to worship, to serve, and to do life together with all of you. So thank you so very much for providing that environment where the Holy Spirit can work. And if you're here today, and maybe you're on that again and again and again and again carousel, it's okay. We want more for you? Yeah. Does your Heavenly Father want more for you? Yeah. Will this church be a safe place to grow and to learn all those things? As long as I'm here. So thank you, each and everybody. I'm going to ask Brittany if she would go towards the back. She wanted to do the blessing instead of how I like to do the blessing. Do you want to read it? Yeah, I'll read it. So this is Brittany's blessing. We just, again, want to thank her. As soon as she says this, we'll be dismissed. If you'd allow her to get to the back door so she can shake hands. And just continue being the gracious, accepting church. Amen? Amen.
The one thing I did want to leave you with today was one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I want to thank each and every one of you who've been a part of Break Free, who are part of this church, who are going on this journey with us, because we're here now, but we don't really know where we're going. But God does, and we're trusting Him. Christy and I and Becky and Jess, we're trusting Him. I asked her if I could pick on her one time, and she said it was okay. So I remember last year, around this time, Doreen and I were sitting at a picnic table at Rockville Correctional Facility in orange jumpsuits, and both of us were, we were broken. We didn't know what we were going to do, but I told her that day, I was like, we're gonna get through this. And here today, we're getting through it. We're not to our end, but we're getting there. So I want to leave you with this, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope. And remember, there is nobody better than you to do what God intended you to do.
Ryan, I'm going to ask if you'll go back with your wife to shake hands. Again, thank you so much for being here. Honestly, I'm a pretty good preacher, so feel free to come back and hear me. tired of these big crowds when I'm not preaching. Grace and peace. We are dismissed.